Today we're going to pause a little bit from talking about absolute value, and we're just simply going to revisit domain and range. It's a concept that never really goes away in math and algebra, so we just want to make sure that you can identify a domain and range correctly. Most of these are going to be by looking at a graph. Now, what you want to do is on the calendar, you want to find the link to the digital lesson. Even if you have this video playing, you want to split your screen and open up that digital lesson because the problems are all on a Google form. So you're going to work through the Google form. A few of the first questions you can do with me. The next couple questions you're going to get to kind of practice and get feedback. And then near the end of the activity, you do some problems on your own. All right, so make sure you open up that link before you go any further with the video. Now, the first problem that you should see should look like our example 1 here. And you're going to learn in a few months that this is called a parabola, but right now it's just kind of a graph that has particular shape to it. Is this graph a function? Okay, just remember that all that is just asking about the vertical line test. And if vertical lines only touch the graph at one point, then we definitely have a function. So this is a big yes. Now, when it comes to the domain, you want to be thinking about what the graph does left and right. These arrows up here, yes, they're pointing up, but the graph is also widening, which means that the graph is going to keep opening left and right forever. We want to conclude that that means that the domain is all real numbers. We typically write that with negative infinity to infinity. When it comes to the range, it's a different story. Do you feel like that the bottom of the graph can be bound? We can make a boundary for the bottom of the graph with this line. Do you feel like maybe this point down here is kind of at the bottom of the graph? There's different ways to look at this, but in the end, you want to think about the y value at this low point, and that y value is negative 4, and the graph definitely goes up from negative 4. So that's why we're going to say that the range, which again is like an up and down idea, starts at negative 4. It actually can equal negative 4, so we'll use a bracket and then goes up to infinity. Example 2. What we have here appears to be like a V shape that's opening, sort of pointing to the right. That's fine. But let's first think about vertical lines. That vertical line touches at 2 points. Now, as soon as that happens, even though it happens again and again and again, as soon as one vertical line touches at 2 points, this thing is not a function. Domain. You want to feel like that this line, this boundary line, represents the furthest this graph seems to be going to the left. The truth is that that's kind of like the starting x value. Again, we want to think about the x value of this and recognize that the graph, everywhere the graph is to the right of negative 5. Since we're to the right of negative 5, we're going to say that we can start at negative 5 and go to infinity. Now the range, remember the range is like what the graph's doing up and down. We do see these arrows. Yes, they seem to be pointing to the right, but they're also pointing up, which means that the graph is going to keep opening up as well as opening down forever. So don't use this point over here. It has nothing to do with how the y values are restricted. The graph keeps going down and keeps going up forever. We represent that as negative infinity to infinity. Example 3. You should see this on your digital version of this domain and range activity. Pretty good, right? This thing's definitely a function. Now, when it comes to the domain, you should feel like that over here, you might say is like the furthest the graph can go to the left. You should feel like over here is the furthest the graph can go to the right. So 5 and negative 5 have a lot to do with the boundaries of this graph. Again, left and right. Now that means that my domain is between negative 5 and 5. But I made a little mistake. We have an open circle right here, as well as right here. Open circle means that you can't equal the value. Okay, no big deal. It just means we'll use parentheses to represent that it's not equal. The range. The range. What do you think about my two lines here? You feel like that the whole graph is between those lines. Well, when it comes to up and down, yes, the whole graph is between y equals 0 and y equals, we're going to say it's y equals 5. I know it looks like it goes a little above that. But the point here is that those two blue lines represent the bottom and top of this graph. So notice I'm looking at the y value. Now, some kids would still focus on, for example, this point right here, or perhaps this point. If you are focused on any of those points, you want to still conclude that y equals 0 is like the lowest that graph goes. And if you're focused on this point, you want to recognize that y equals 5 is the highest that it goes. That's the same thing that we just said, that the graph is between 0 and 5. Now, it's not going to be able to equal 0, so we use a parenthesis, but it can equal 5. We'll use a bracket. Okay, I like the boundary lines that I drew. It's a little easier than trying to use these points. Again, if you use the points, sometimes you kind of misuse them. In other words, we maybe use the wrong value, but it's just the y value for the range. There's example 4. Now, this graph's a little bit different. It doesn't seem to have like two sides. No problem. It definitely is a function. Let's talk about the domain. Okay, definitely the graph is going to the left, but we want to feel like that it starts right here. Now, when we focus on this right here, it's the x value that we're focused on. So the graph, you might say it starts at 5, that's the x value, and then goes to the left. Now be careful, because if you write that as 5 negative infinity, you kind of wrote it backwards, right? We're supposed to use the smaller number than the bigger number. But it's still the same idea. 5 is that starting point to negative infinity. What about the range? When we think about the range, we want to think that the graph is going down. Yes, it's going to keep going down. But again, it starts right here. When we say it starts right here, we want to think of the y value. So now our eyes, our brain wants to think negative 2. We want to think that the y value is negative 2. Okay, so how do I say that I start at negative 2 but keep going down, down, down? Okay, well, technically, I have to write it as negative infinity to negative 2. So when you look at this point right here, we'll make it big and black. When you look at this point, you might say it represents the starting, but you have to separate the x and the y when you do the domain and the range. I think we have one more example, a little bit different. Okay, now what you want to do here is, don't make something up that's not true. Like, don't connect the dots. If we connect the dots, that's a whole different graph. The truth is all we have are the dots. Okay, if you look at these dots and you draw like vertical lines, you're never touching more than one point at the same time, so it's still a function. But the domain is literally just the x values of the dots. So, for example, x equals negative 4, x equals 2, negative 2. Here's x equals 2 and 4. So we're just looking at the x values. Now, when you have a list of numbers, what you want to do is you want to put them as a set using commas, using brackets. So I'm just literally listing those x values. And You get the idea? We're just going to do the same thing for the range, which are the y values. Now, I get a y value of 1, a y value of 4. I get a y value of 1 again, and a y value of negative 4. Well, that's not a problem. As long as I don't repeat the x values, it's still a function. But it's no big deal that I repeated the y values. Actually, the truth is, when I list them, I just don't need to list them more than once. Now, normally we start at negative 4. We start at the lowest number, but then I get my 1. Again, I don't need to write that again. And then I get my 4. So my range just includes 3 numbers. Now, that was supposed to serve as a little review. Now you got some problems to try. Like I said, the next set of problems, they're self-correcting. That means that if you get it wrong, it's going to make you do it again. Don't guess until you get it right. Think about it. And then when you get to the last part of the activity, there's some questions you're going to answer for a grade. You want to answer them correctly. They're not going to self-correct for you. All right? Keep up the good work.